Good afternoon. This is Hangar 7, date 16th of August 2009. Your name, please, sir?
Graham Williamson.
And address?
62 Prince Street, Virginia.
Now, is your memory time related to during World War II?
No.
And obviously then it is after.
After.
Is it related specifically to Hangar 7?
Yes. And
to Eagle Farm in general?
yes.
Right. So, roughly what age were you at that time?
My first connection with Hangar 7, I was 29. It was 1963.
And you were living at Prince Street in those days as well?
Yes.
Good steady worker.
Yes.
And fairly obviously from your attire, you were working for TAA.
Yes.
And you've already stated that that's for 14 years.
Yes.
Can you give us some of your memories of the time, some of the things you specifically did while you worked at Eagle Farm, please?
Well, yes, let me think. I was a porter aircraft loader. They called them porters then. And our duties were not only to load and unload aircraft, but we had to sweep the lounge, hangar lounge right out. We were the toilet cleaners. We had to clean the public toilets, male and female. It was quite a job. What else? We had to wash steps. We had to push steps into the aircraft because they were all ground aircraft. Push these heavy steps in, and the aircraft parked one in front of the other, propeller aircraft, and we had to be very careful that the steps didn't get blown over when the aircraft in front started. Many a time we've had to almost lie on the ground ourselves rather than get blown over. I was on duty the day a ANA Viscount crashed.
Nose wheel collapse?
After it ran off the concrete and into the dirt. What caused it, we not know. There was a lot of talk that it was a very wet day and he may have aquaplaned. Another talk was that reversed his propeller and gave it full pitch instead of reverse pitch, and off he went. Nose wheel collapsed on the Viscount, back up into the baggage locker, and it was the only time they were able to get passengers off with the DC-3 steps of a Viscount. And it took them days to get it out, and they brought it into the hangars next door, the Ansett maintenance hangars, rebuilt it, repaired it, and flew it down to Melbourne. What's another one? Another one, so many things. Oh, the fire in the lounge, TAA lounge, completely burnt out. Started in the cookhouse, in the kitchen, I believe. It was a bad fire, and I was called on. One of the chaps said, "Oh no, what about our overtime book?" So I said, "Hold it." So I went in, through all the smoke, and how terrible, and into Doug Rose's office, who was the head boy in there at the time, head man, and here's the overtime book, still intact. It was great. Brought it out, and they cheered. And the dispatch officers at the ticket counter, they didn't have a key. They couldn't open the cash drawer to get the cash out. And of course I enjoyed playing with padlocks. And they called me in. And I just had a look at it, and all I had to do was get a knife and just go like that and opened the drawer, and they couldn't believe it. The lock was on the front. It was pulled out, instead. Anyhow, they got their money. It wasn't damaged. And then we had to use the Qantas hangar for our passengers and our baggage loading and what have you. We'll book them all into the Qantas hangar until our new hangar was built, the big hangar. So that was quite a time. What else? I see that. No, I did not hear them use the test beds, engine test beds. There was no noise because the engines then were transferred to Melbourne.
Right.
We used to load DC-3, DC-4 engines in a DC-3 freighter and fly them to Melbourne for maintenance and repairs. So there was no noise from that part at all.
You make mention of Vietnam troops.
Oh yes, yes. We loaded their guns and their packs and what have you onto the planes, and I think they flew to Sydney, and then they flew out of Sydney. I think it was Sydney they flew out.
I flew out of Sydney on a Qantas 707.
You were Vietnam?
Yes.
Oh right, right. And you were loaded here, were you?
No, I was already in the Sydney area.
Oh right. Well, we loaded them here and then flew them down. You see, that was a big job. Not much else I can think of. You
also mentioned having been here when the US President Johnson came through Brisbane.
Yes, yes. We couldn't move around the tarmac up around the lounge area, which we had to do, go out there all the time to work until we had ID, security ID. My wife came over and they gave her security ID. She could come out on the tarmac with us, which we did, and we went up and she shook President Johnson's hand, and he was right up the far end with his great table and all his people with him, and people in front, sitting down. It was a great turnout. It was good. Something big for Eagle Farm Airport.
Since you were a baggage handler, how would the baggage handling have differed in your early days to the way it's done now? Were those little escalator type things for the bags in existence, or were you having to throw them up or hand them up to the people actually in the hold?
We had to hand them up. The baggage was on end. Most of it you could pick it up with the lid folded over just a little bit. We used to put our hand in the lid, and there was a pound weight for each case. I forget what it was, but it enabled us to pick it up on end and throw it up like this and into the baggage compartment, and it was all conveyor belt in the lounge, came down the conveyor belt, and we had a barra for 462, 411, and it all had to be, and then they were towed out to the aircraft.
That was a question I was going to ask. They were actually towed out.
Towed
you didn't have to push them out.
No, towed out, little tugs, and they might have 3 or 4, and dropped 2 at the front and 1 at the tail, a certain weight to go in the tail, and all that sort of thing.
No containers in those days, of course. It was just packed into the
baggage compartments. Yes.
What about general cargo? Apart from bags, general cargo. How was that handled in a similar fashion?
Yes, we used to have for the DC-4s. For the DC-4s, we used to have a conveyor belt down a tractor conveyor belt, and we were upstairs, and it was loaded up. We used to come up the conveyor belt. We used to take it off and walk down the aircraft and pack it and walk back and get it. Oh gosh. Oh, and the more you got in the aircraft, the less tired you got, because we worked our way down to the back door. An aircraft came in, was it early morning? I'm not sure. And the DC-4s, I had to put a tail prop underneath. And the tail prop wasn't put in properly, or it was forgot to be put in, and the DC-4 went tail down. They used to bring the aircraft up for us to load or unload. We'd put the steps in for the pilot and co-pilot, come down, and I used to go up into the cockpit and throw the switch to light all the aircraft up from the ground battery. That was an honour to be able to do that, to go into the cockpit. And putting aircraft engines in a DC-3, I always complain and ask, could we prop the tail of a DC-3 up level so we could roll it down? No, we had to push it uphill, didn't we? And then strap it down. Oh gosh. No, they were great days. Terrific days. Not much about this front section of Hangar 7 was our lunchroom, locker room. And then our showers and toilet were a special section built outside, which is all gone now. It's all, you wouldn't know it was a lunchroom, locker room. It was great. But no, that's my memories.
Well, thank you, Graham. For the moment, that seems to be what you can think of, and I have no doubt that now that you've said all this, you'll go home and think of a few other things, and you might like to put pen to paper and draw a line to us and let us know what some of those things were. Thank you very much for your time.
A pleasure.
Okay, good afternoon. we're in Hangar 7 at Eagle Farm on the 16th of August 2009. Your name, please.
Munro Cutmore.
And your address?
27/60 Endeavour Boulevard, North Lakes.
Thank you very much. Now, you have two separate sets of memories, I believe, one belonging to World War II, which did not involve Eagle Farm, and you brought some memorabilia with you. You might like to start with some of the stories of what you were talking about before.
Right. I was recruited with the US Army Air Corps in 1943, and I started working in Ballow Street in the Fortitude Valley. My father was already working for the United States Army Air Corps, and my brother joined at the same time, and because we had come from the country to Brisbane because of my father's health. He was in sawmilling and couldn't continue on, so the manpower authorities allowed him to take on lighter work. So from the latter part of 1943, we shifted from Vallow Street in the valley to Warehouse 21, which is just over the other side of the railway line. And eventually, all the US Army Air Corps stores was located at Eagle Farm, excepting one unit, which was, or two units, sorry. One had chemicals and dust type of things that paints and what have you. And the other one was aircraft engines. And that was at Breakfast Creek. So that was the setup from 1943, and I worked here until mid-1946. I took a temporary transfer to Okinawa with the US Army Air Corps, and I was a supply inspector or an aircraft parts inspector. We wore the uniform of a junior officer, and there were our cap badges. Came back from Okinawa after 6 months. And then I did another stint of 6 months on Guam, and that was I was terminated in January 1948.
Unusual as a civilian, you wore a uniform.
Yes. We were given a status of a junior officer because we lived in officers' quarters and we ate in officers' mess. That was the reason for it. That photograph you've just taken, they were the day shift on, I'd say it was around about 1944, and they were the staff from warehouses 21 and 22. And so there was a day shift. There were afternoon shifts and night shifts initially, but then they were finally phased out, just on the latter part of the war.
And when this period of your experience is finished, you then moved on to operate in the Eagle Farm area working for DCA, I believe.
That is correct, yes. I started, although I had another job in between in retailing, but I joined the Department of Civil Aviation in March of 1949, and I stayed with the department till about 1961.
And you started as what? With DCA?
With them, I went back into the same store that I was in during World War II, handling the same type of materials. I guess Stewie, he'd already had a continuous service, because he'll tell you his side of it, but maybe that he had something in when he knew that I was looking for a job, that that the antennas went up. I was a stoneman. I was a forklift driver at the age of 15. No licences required those days. We were competent. No pallets available. You just edged up to a crate or a case, put your forks in, and a ledge up a little, someone would put a piece of 3x2 underneath there, and you lift your forks down, and then you went in underneath the case. That was normal operation of a forklift driver. There was one I can recall in the shipping department. They used to have a two-man operation. One bloke used to sit on the back of a Clark forklift with his piece of 3x2, so the driver never had to get off. That's how busy they were. Right. Yes.
And I believe you had an ancillary operation, a job while you were there.
Department of Civil Aviation, yes. In as much as that I was the storeman in charge of hardware and building materials and firefighting equipment. The fire chief decided that I think I knew more about the firefighting equipment than he did. He came out from London and he had been a fire warden in London during the World War II. But when you start to talk about fittings and what have you, he totally different, obviously. Because we inherited some of the All-American stuff. When the 11 thread per inch, incompatible with the Australian stuff, which was 1.5 roll thread that you put onto fire stands. So yes, and I used to attend the fire practices. We had old aircraft that were brought from Archerfield, totally unserviceable, and set them alight.
Can you remember any of the types?
Anson was one. I believe the other one was a Lincoln, something like that. Pretty certain it was a Lincoln. But the funny part about it, there were two Ansons brought from Archerfield, and the Department of Civil Aviation cannibalised one and made that other one a flying Anson. And my wife, who also worked for the Department of Civil Aviation, she was a girl of 18, 19, she had to get her parents' consent, and she went up on a flight in that, down over the Sandgate or somewhere like that. I wouldn't think my chances there were an old Aggie that had been in the dump and brought back to life again. Yeah.
Whilst your job was off airfield, you still must have been aware of various happenings on the airfield here itself.
Oh yes, it was just part and parcel of it. When I first started, when we transferred from Ballow Street in the Valley, some of these hangars weren't even built. M.R. Hornibrook had a contract, obviously, for this particular igloo type building, and so we actually saw them all built from about hangar 4 onwards. And the stores, which are just over the other side of the railway line, there was only 2 completed there, and finished up like 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 5 stores over there, 400 feet long, 100 feet wide.
And were you aware of what was going on in Hangar 7?
Yes, most decidedly. It was an off-limits for everyone. We could see from the railway platform the barbed wire entanglements on the top of fences. We could see the broken parts of Japanese aircraft lying outside in the open, not even covered up, because we could see the big orange roundels, and we all knew that this was secret business going on there. We knew what it was about, but eventually we did find out when they assembled either a Zero or a whatever. We couldn't tell from a distance, but we had a bird's eye view of them testing out Zero and whatever against other aircraft and in mock dogfights over Eagle Farm Airport. We used to stand there with their mouth open and see them do verticals and then fall over backwards, you know, come down like that. Yeah, so that was...
And can you remember any other specifics associated with the airfield itself during the war?
Yes,
I've
yes.
seen liberators around.
Oh yes, liberators, yes, there were liberators here, but the main thrust in the early days was the Thunderbolt, the P-47, radial engine, and they were a bit of a dog. They had a habit of falling out of the sky a bit. I saw at least 2 do a belly land, and another one that took off. He got over and past Brett's Wharf there and came down in the mangroves, and my brother was working in the aircraft reclamation, that was the word they used, so that any old aircraft, they would pull out the parts and anything that was good went back in the store and the other stuff went to junk. And he was over there at that site, were pulling pieces out, pilots' guts and parachutes and things like that. That was a P-47.
So the pilot was obviously killed in that accident?
Yes, that was the only pilot was killed off the field, but there were at least 5, maybe 7, 5 I'll say for certain, in a B-26 Martin Marauder. It took off from that Nudgee road end. It was coming on a cross strip, and I don't know what happened, whether he was taking too much runway, but he pulled it back and she did a backflip just outside of here. We could see the flames, we could see the fire brigade, and they were burnt to death. You know, the fire brigade was useless. The airport fire brigade, they never used any civilian fire equipment in those days, never called on Hamilton or anyway, as they would do in this day and age. So yes, so the only fatality ever on this airfield, that Martin Marauder went in. Had he continued on, he would have gone through the Ford Motor Company, which was at the end of the strip. So that may be, and he was only going over to Archerfield to get some maintenance done on it.
Just to go back to the Japanese fighters, we were just wondering, were you able to make any sort of assessment of how well they operated against the Australian or the Allied fighters that you saw when they were doing the dogfighting?
I saw Lockheed Lightning, saw a Thunderbolt and a Spitfire. And the Spitfire had more capability than the other two on the vertical climbs. And if it was a Zero, we used to watch whatever was up. We couldn't tell identification from distance. But the Zero had more capability of going up and losing the other Lockheed Lightning or the Thunderbolt, but the Spitfire was the only one that got near it. Yeah, so it was more manoeuvrable, yes. It was really exhilarating to stand there and watch what's going on. You know? It swooped down low over the airport and then go straight up into verticals and then it's all over, yep.
And post-war, can you recall any incidents on the field
yes,
in your time?
Yes. When I was an auxiliary fireman, I attended an east-west, I'll think of it in a moment.
DC-3 or F-27? F-27 Friendship?
Oh no, earlier than that.
Oh, going back to Anson's. I think Anson's,
No.
DC-3s and F-27s were...
No, the TAA used to use one as a feeder from Cairns to Townsville. That's how the business was there. They carried about 18 people. But East West Airlines, they were Leave it with me, because one went in and Coolangatta as well, and the whole lot went in.
The Lodestar, Lockheed Lodestar.
Lockheed Lodestar, yes, a Lodestar on East West Airlines.
That's right.
One of the landing gear folded, and she skidded along on the, but didn't catch fire. But I had in my warehouse, it had never been tested, never been used, an inflatable bag, which was to be put under the wing and lifted up. Now, they said to me, can we get that out of store? I said, yeah, but I don't think it's going to be much good to you because, yeah. And anyhow, but they took it over there but never used it because DCA had acquired a mobile crane from the US when they left here, and they were able to lift it up and get it back on deck again. I saw a DC-4 do a belly. Well, I didn't see it do the belly land, but I saw it on the deck. Captain Keith's Virtue at his last flight. I don't know how many people he had on board, but apparently he just forgot to put the undercart down. Yeah, and I went to another one. It was a light aircraft. It was something like a Cessna or something like that. Single engine. But he was doing a long flight, and he had a 44-gallon drum of fuel inside where passengers would normally sit. He had these guy ropes down, or steel they were, down onto the floor. Yeah, he pulled his undercart up too quick and did a belly flop. No fire again. So I never actually attended one in the real sense, where a fire or it was evacuation or anything like that. But on the drill, we used to have these foam generators, FB2s, FB10s, something like that. The material was made out of offal from slaughter yards in Ireland, and I stored this stuff, and it stank. It was a shocker. But when we were fighting a fire on practice, and there was a wind blowing, the person who was standing there was firing out this great heap of foam, and the bloke next door, he's doing exactly the same, and you're copying half his foam, and you'll be covered in this white foam. Yeah. So that's.
So, can you think of anything else at the present moment?
No, I can remember, I believe, I might be wrong, but I believe I saw the only B-29 ever that came to Eagle Farm.
Yeah, there was one here,
Yep.
I know that.
It came on a fundraising thing for Liberty bombs or something like that. I saw plenty of them when I was on Okinawa and Guam. They're the order of the day. Yeah.
Yes.
I knew pilots who flew them during World War II. Yeah, right. There was a fire alarm test every Monday morning at 8 o'clock at a building outside the admin building. There was a generator built in there which was to cope with the electricity for all the emergency services, for tower, for runway lights and things like that. And they used to run that up once a week as to keep it in order, and they had this big siren up on the top. At 8 o'clock, it was near the siren was working. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But there's so much of your everyday work. I was driving a forklift at 15, and we had a rail ramp that there was a siding came in, and a lot of the materials that we would ship went to Townsville because they had a store in Townsville, southeast. We would have to load those if we were required. But we were more likely, if there was a ship in port and it was transit materials, the trucks used to just come in from the wharf, and we would be there with forklifts on both sides, and we'd lift up a piece of 3x2 underneath, and with the cases and crates were so big, you always had to go in reverse, because you couldn't see, even standing up, you couldn't see over the top of them.
So this was bond material, basically. It went into bond until it went...
No, there was no such a thing as bond. It was just transferable. It was on a ship that came to Brisbane, and it was later shipped out. It was a transit store. That was Warehouse 24. I can recall when going home from work in Lamington Avenue, there was a line-up of Lockheed Lightning P-38s, but they were all cocooned, come off a ship, and they didn't have donks in them, but they had lead shot for the counterbalance because they were tricycle landing gear. Yep. So, you know, saw them coming in straight from the wharf. Yep.
All right, thank you, Munro. We
Right.
might leave it at that for the time being, and you might think about something for later.
Yes, just to a few things I'd written here for Roger. In 1942, Eagle Farm was occupied by the 81st Air Depot Group. Have you got that in
We
your
know
mind?
them.
You know that?
Mm-hmm.
Which was initially landed in Melbourne. Have you got any thing about the airbase they were establishing in Charleville?
Immediately,
Right.
no.
So when I first came in 1943, the war was going better for us, so the Charleville one was disbanded, and they put all the stuff back in boxes, and we had to sort it all. I can remember, the Yanks call what we call a split pin, they call it a cotter pin, yeah, and they counted them by each. So. And that was the first job I was given, was to sort out all these so-called cotter pins, you know. After many years later, they converted them over to, I think it was gross boxes rather than individual cotter pins. Anyway, then I said around about 1944, this group was posted to a base in New Guinea.
BIAC.
Could have been BIAC, yes. Highly secretive, no doubt, but those people had been in Australia since 1942. Now, some of them were married, some of them had family, and they used to just be like a 9-to-5 worker, except when they had to do KP, or they had to go for a short arm inspection. There was a house just beside the warehouses where you'd see the great queue up, going from in front of the medical officer for a short arm inspection. Yeah. Then they were succeeded by, it was the 11th Field Squadron or something similar to that. They had been in a war zone and came out and they took over from the 81st Air Depot Group. The 81st Air Depot Group, they must have had someone at the top who was going to set them up pretty well in New Guinea, because I can remember they had about 50 cases of cyclone fly wire, mosquito-proof wire, and make sure that no one else got it. They painted them camouflage green. There wasn't one mark on the box. Right, so I don't know whether you've got that, the 11th Field Squadron, but it was a name like that. It was, we always had a sergeant or a corporal along with our own foreman. We always had civilian foremen, but you always had a lieutenant as the overall director on the ground, and then he would have a staff of one or two, and then there was the servicemen were assigned to each unit. See, in Warehouse 21, there was units F, D and K, and Stewie was in D.
All right, if you don't mind, we might wrap it up at this
Right,
point.
then? Yeah. Originally...
A couple more people to interview, and
Yep,
we're running
yes.
out of time.
Stewie is...
We'll do Stewie next.
Yeah, just in passing, that it was US Army Air Corps until after the war, then it became the US Army Air Force, and then later on it became the US Air Force. So there were 3 changes, or 2 changes from the original. That is a document that's been, I was awarded for my service to
I took a picture.
World War II.
Well done. Thank you. Thank you, Munro. Good afternoon. We're in Hangar 7, and today is the 16th of August 2009. Your name, please.
Stuart Wright.
And your address?
Oh, it's 67 something.
Glasshouse Circuit.
Glasshouse Circuit, yeah.
Galang. And your period of work was during World War II and post World War II, I believe, in the Eagle Farm area.
And that's right, yeah. I came out from the AIF, discharged in 1943.
And where had you been in the AIF?
I'd been in New Guinea,
Right.
and I was wounded, and I had malaria and very bad, what do you call it? You know.
Skin conditions.
Yeah. And I was in the 2nd 9th AGH in just outside Moresby.
Right. And so your job then was warehousing, I believe.
Yes, well I was having a beer up at Noosa, and I met a couple of blokes up there. And they said, what are you going to do? I was dressed in the khaki, you know. And I said, I'm going back. I've been offered 2 jobs as sawmiller, you know. Well, they said, you're mad, don't go back there. They said, we can get you $8 a week, you know, here. Work for the X, which I said, fair enough, so I did. Joined up with them, and you join them as not of a forklift driver, which you get a lot of forklift driving, you know. But, and then we used to unload all the trucks that are coming from the Liberty ships, you know, they were coming in. And we'd have to work very hard and to clear that, what they were carrying, you know. And then they'd form up the squadrons and they'd go from there.
Right. And so even though you were inside a building on the other side of the railway line, you would obviously have been able to see what was going on on the field here.
You could hear they used to test the aircraft too, you could hear them all night long. Yeah.
And can you recall any incidents that occurred on the airfield during your time?
Well, funny or not?
Oh, well,
You don't care
any
what
sort.
Well, in those days we had a lot of elderly people because they could looking for people to work, you know. But they'd work a while and then go out to the toilets, you see, and sit there. And I was a young bloke in those days, and we got a bit crooked on that. So we used to go out there after a while and pull a chain, you know. Got rid of them.
And one particular question, obviously, since you were so near to this hangar, were you aware of what they were doing in this hangar during the war? Were you able to see or hear any stories of what the Americans were doing with Japanese aircraft across here, or was that all a mystery to you?
No, we had provos, of course. They were American provos, and they'd tell you some stories too. But anyway, they used to walk around and swing their revolvers. And they didn't know what I was doing in khaki, you know. And I said, well, I've just been discharged, you know. I'm entitled to it. And I said, any of you blokes have been in action? And they said, no. It sound them out, you know. Yeah.
So did you actually see any of these Japanese aircraft that were in this area here?
Oh, yeah. The Zeros was quite common that they used up there, yeah.
But in this area here, in Hangar 7, did you see
No,
them?
I didn't go up close to them, no, but I could hear them. They used to test them all the time. They'd run for days, you know.
And Munro said he watched them dogfight over the field. Did you ever see any of that?
Oh, yes, used to see, sham, dog fights, yeah. And so, there's plenty going on.
And so post World War II, you stayed working? I
Well,
believe.
when the Yanks, I got a letter from Uncle Sam thanking me for my work, and then we went to disposals, and I got a job there, and then from disposals I got a job with DCA, and then I started as just an ordinary storeman. I worked my way up to a regional man. I was in charge of 32 staff in Queensland. That started off as a storeman, and I was pretty proud of that.
That's good. And again, so were you able to, you were aware of the goings on the airfield here since you were so close? Can you recall?
Oh yeah.
Recall any outstanding incidents?
Not really, no, not really. But it was all hands on deck when the Liberty ships come in. You had to get them unloaded, so they could go back and get filled up again. And of course, you'd be aware that they used to turn out a ship a day, the Yanks. And sometimes they'd keep us back. We'd have to keep working until we finished. You'd have all the trucks lined up coming from the wharf.
And it's been suggested that there's a story about a colonel and parachutes.
Oh yeah, there was a big to do about there was short of musical instruments, and the colonel was waiting on this piano coming in, and everything had to be right. But when they opened it up, they found all this rubbish in it, and no piano. So there was a big to do about that. I don't know whether they ever found out.
This was the colonel's?
Colonel's.
The colonel's piano.
Yeah.
Been stolen.
Been stolen, yeah.
Probably some Aussies.
Well, probably, yeah. But anyway, yeah. Oh, well, there's sort of black markets going on in those days too, we used to test the parachutes used to go into and be tested, and then they'd come back again. But I was on the truck one day with this Yank, and he said, "How about we sell these?" I said, "Like anything." I said, I want to be in there. Yeah, they're up to all sorts of tricks.
So, any other memories of those times? Did you have any association with this hangar at all?
This hangar?
Mm.
7?
Mm.
No, it was mainly what? They used to repair the aircraft.
That's
here.
right.
Yeah. No, not much at all. No. I was more on the passenger side, that sort of thing. But anyway, I enjoyed myself. You make good friends in the Americans, and you pick them out because they're like us. There's some bad ones and some good ones.
All right, Stewie, thank you very much for your time and,
That's all
and
right.
your memories, and we'll...
I've lost a few of them over the years, I think, yeah.
Good afternoon, we're in Hangar 7 and it's the 16th of August 2009. And your name, please?
Sybil Brady,
And address?
193 Beaconsfield Terrace, Brighton.
Thank you. And your association was specifically on this airfield with Hangar 7. Could you give us some information about what it was, what you did and what it was like? When you came and...
Well, it was just going back to looking in that hangar there was an opening both ends, big opening both ends, and at one end, that would be where the office was. That's what I'm assuming in my memory.
All right. So the offices were in that corner of the hangar, we think?
I think so.
Yes.
I think so.
I think that's where Roger and I worked out.
I would say
probably
so.
was.
But that is different because there's just a square opening there now, but it was just one big building that planes could discuss.
Yes, yes.
Well, I worked in the office and,
But you weren't a civilian, were you?
no, I was away.
That's right.
Son up at the ground.
And I took shorthand in the actual hangar when they brought these planes, crashed planes down and they rebuilt them.
Right.
And I'd be there whilst they were examining it. If there was any information at all they had, I'd take it in shorthand and then type it back.
Right.
So that's what I did all day. That was my work.
And
Yeah.
you typed them up or somebody else? You
typed
typed
them.
them up as well?
Yes, it was because I took it in shorthand so that nobody could understand my shorthand. I had to do that.
And your own private shorthand?
Oh, well,
To some extent.
to some extent, yes.
Yes.
So that was mainly what I did, yes, and that's...
You'd have had a very good security clearance, of course.
I was here not for very long because I was being vetted to go into Signal Intelligence Service, which was just over Dascott.
Right, and how old were you at the time?
20.
Just 20.
So then that's why I haven't got as strong a recollection here as I did with the others I worked with longer. But I can remember very, very strongly, of course, it was Sammy, the test pilot,
Right.
and Clyde Gessel, who was the captain in charge, and the other Sammy Sammy Hepworth was the test pilot, you know. Did you notice that?
No.
He was a test pilot.
Right.
And Joe Capalby worked side by side with us, and Joy Gillian. The four of us, we worked together all the time, mostly.
Right.
So I can remember those very well. But I couldn't remember actually where the entrance, we'd come by a truck, a big truck would bring us to work.
Right.
Because I was camped at Victoria Barracks, so we came here to work and then we were taken back again. So more or less that was my job here.
And did you actually get out into the hangar amongst the bits and pieces, or was
Oh
it?
yes, I worked in there.
Right.
I worked
And
sitting up in the actual plane whilst they were...
Right.
You know, I was sitting up, and as I was telling Jan, they did all sorts of tricks with me. They'd start the dasting plane going while I was in it, you know, and I'd want to jump out. Yes. So they were always, you know, having a joke with me, of course, because I responded, and that's why they did it all the more, I suppose. Yes.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
I went up with the test pilot in the plane, and Sammy Hepworth took me for a...
Can you remember what sort of aeroplane it was?
No, yeah, well I can only remember it had a canopy at the back.
Right,
I
so
remember
you-
it was
You pilot in front and you behind.
I don't know what that would have been, but it wouldn't have been a fighter because they only had one.
That's right, yes. Yes, it'd be probably that little Curtiss Falcon or maybe a T6.
It was an awful experience. It creaked and groaned and moaned, and I thought it was falling to pieces.
Just a single engine though.
Yes.
Yes, it'd be one of those two probably
Yes.
times.
But he took me for and he was a daredevil, of course, and did all sorts of things with me, and that he shouldn't have. However, that's more or less all I remember.
Right, so you were only here for a few months and then you moved on to SIS?
I stayed with the Signals.
For the rest
I
of
worked with in the decoding section. All the messages that came through, I typed those back, and
Right.
a lot of them were in code still, numbers and... Yes, I worked there till the end of the war.
All right. Well, thank you, Sybil. Thank you for
Okay.
that.
I'm sorry I couldn't give you any much information, but I know that's what the planes did. That's what they did anyway.
Yes,
for
well,
sure.
you're our closest contact with the aeroplanes.
What a pity that I wasn't a man that actually worked amongst them all. They could have given you more information
No,
about.
that's all right. If you had been, you'd have been off in New Guinea somewhere or other being shot at probably. So. Okay, good afternoon. We're in Hangar 7 and it's the 16th of August 2009. Your name, please.
Tony Lloyd,
And your address?
10 Eastleigh Street, Chermside.
Thank you. And your association with the airfield, could you give us some basic information, please?
I was with ANSET from 1968 till 1998, and I started off in ground transport, into clerking, load and trim, and then I was the state manager for international cargo and ground handling from 88 till 98.
And being with ANSET, you wouldn't have had much association with this hangar specifically, would you?
I did.
You did?
Matter of fact, I can still see, I was just explaining to Mike, I can still see three faces that used to associate ourselves with between here and the Happy House, because we had a Happy House up the end here. I don't know whether you're aware of that or not. It was run by the, what do they call themselves? Not FAC, before that, DCA. DCA ran it. It was a house, and they had a bar in it. And we didn't have to pay the extra prices because we're on Commonwealth land, so the more you drank, the more you saved. And that was one of the best parts that happened to this airport because we all knew each other. And Merv Witt was the guy that was my counterpart. He operated that little office up the front there. There was Peter and Neil, they were the three international guys. And as I said, I walked back here, it was like nostalgia all over again. It was great.
And so it was the hangar, these office sections were here in those days?
See, what happened, they converted this to the freight shed because it wasn't always a freight shed. And when the guys, because the international terminal used to be next door, one down, and that's when they even got changed around, including our hangar. Because in those days we were purely domestic until we moved across to the new airport in 88. And then we started doing ground handling for international carriers, the likes of Continental and Garuda and Cathay Pacific.
And that was out of this hangar?
No.
Oh,
that's the other one.
Right.
No, all we ever did here internationally ourselves was a few ad hoc charters.
Right.
CL44s, DC8s and 707s. That was sort of the mode of freighters those days.
And can you recall any specific incidents that spring to mind, either humorous or otherwise, of your days working on the airfield, either within ANSET or just on the field in general?
Well, I suppose when you put me on a spot like that, they sort of fade into... But it was an interesting place to work because, I'll be totally honest, we never treated it really as a job because it was just a neat place to come and spend your time. Because I was on shift work for 20 years.
Lucky man.
And then the last 10 I was a manager, so I went to a different zone altogether. So, no, it was an era. I said I come onto this airport as a boy and left an old man.
Can you think of anything, Mike, that would help us?
Oh. Well, actually, one thing that does come to mind straight up is just like the change of aircraft.
Right.
When I started here, I mean, we had Carve Airs. That was our freighters. And the F-27, and we had an old Bristol freighter. And then as time sort of moved on, because we just got jets, because we got the first 727s in 64, just before I arrived, then the DC-9s. And as our freighter aircraft changed, we had 4 Electras as freighters in the final analysis. Then we sort of went out of them a little while, and then they bought a 707. VHHTC was that reg on that one. And they operated out of Perth, Melbourne mainly. But we had a few charters out here with it, like cattle charters. We did a couple into Norfolk Island, we did low. Not with the 707. We also had a 727 RMX as a 200 series. But as I said, when you say humorous things, I mean, sometimes when you do these charters, some of the characters you meet, because in those days we did a lot of horse charters from New Zealand. We just, like that's in January, you'd have the spring carnival, then the winter carnival. And I still remember one paper came out, how to make $1 million in 10 days. And we made $1 million out of this aeroplane just flying horses across the Tasman. Because we used to do Melbourne, Auckland, Sydney, Auckland, Brisbane. And then it'd weave its way back and then it'd go and do its own freighter runs. But as I said, it was the days of plenty of money, good aircraft. I mean, we didn't know old aircraft in those days. Not like, times changed because a lot of people said, well, why can't it be cheap? I said, if you've got cheap, you get what you pay for. So, as I said, times changed, but we were there in the good times.
What were the carvers like to load?
Oh, they're easy. Should just open the front up and just slide everything down the front. Where the electrics are a side loader, as you probably know. And but they're all quick. Everything's quick change.
And the Bristol must have been a bit of a handful. They were pretty slow. And
Didn't do too much of that Bristol. I mean, we had a cyclone up in North Queensland. We had to get the whole place was cut off. There was flying food up there. The lecturer would take off. The Bristol would take off after him. He'd come back and he'd pass him on the way back again.
the Bristol would have had the advantage, though, that you could probably fit a longer load into a Bristol than you could into an Electra, for example.
Oh yeah.
So it would take certain items that you couldn't take any other way.
True story. Like mining equipment, that sort of stuff. But we didn't have them very long because they were an antique, even when I started.
I know them.
But once they went, good aeroplane. And then ATAIU were handling the Argosies those days. So, no, interesting times.
Do you recall the DC-4 that was still running out for the Solomons in recent years?
Yes, I knew that one of the guys was loadmaster on it, actually.
Yeah. What can you tell us about that operation?
Well, I'll just bring
still
in the...
running.
No, I think it's still
Still
flying,
running recently. Yeah.
but it's not doing that run because that was taken over by one of the forwarders. They were running a 727 up there because they're bringing the fish out of the Solomons. What they'd do, they'd fly out of here in the evening, come back and be at 4 o'clock, and they'd transfer it straight from there for that aircraft to Japan Airlines, started to Tokyo. That's why it was, the time was, factor was crucial to get fish on, fish off, and up there for the market. So basically it was around about a 24-hour turnaround from the fish out of the boat onto the markets in Japan. But that old aeroplane, it's Nifty Nev was the guy, ex-Qantas, and he was the loadmaster on it. And he actually gave me a tour of that aeroplane one day. He said, I've got to show you something up here. It's rather unique, is the toilet. I said, what is it? He says, goes up the back, pull this little door up, and there's a funnel. And you're looking out in the mid-air, you can see everything going past the aeroplane. That was the toilet, down the funnel. Yeah.
Do you recall why they were still using that aircraft when it was so old?
Well, basically, because they had no aircraft that was, I suppose, capable of moving that amount of fish out of the Solomons to hook in with this service, because there's no scheduled service up there with freighter aircraft. So we didn't have all that many freighter aircraft in Australia, in reality, because we had the Electras, TI had the Argosies, and after that we got the 146s, and we had the 727, only one, and the 707. I would say that we didn't have that long either, because TNT bought that off Lufthansa. It was a nice aeroplane, but apart from the Perth Melbourne run, it didn't do too much else, and then disappeared.
I don't recall it at all.
Yeah, that was it, HTC. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Tony. That's interesting. Yeah, so.
In relation to the Allison test stand, I worked within, 500 metres, I suppose, of the stand. We worked 24 hours round the clock, and the noise from those Allisons being tested was deafening, and it was such a relief when they cut them off. But all we could see was this great flame coming out the side and that was all we could see of the test stand. But my story is that I knew of a gentleman, he's dead now, his name was Edgar Thomas. He was a backyard motorcycle repairer in Toowoomba. I couldn't say mechanic because there was no apprenticeship for motorcycles at that time. It was an ordinary motor mechanic apprenticeship, right? So they wanted people with mechanical knowledge to do the service on these Allison V12s, and that was subbed out to private enterprises, and he got the job with them, with one of these suppliers. It could have been Motor Suppliers or Paul and Gray or someone like that. I'm not quite sure which firm he did actually work for, but before he was allowed to get into the industry, he had to do a crash course in Allison V12s. And he did that, I think it was around about 12 weeks. But when he completed it, the union stepped in and they said, "You're a diluted tradesman. When you finish this, when the war is over, you are no longer a tradesman." And Edgar Thomas lived at Bowen Hills and worked on these testing down here. He used to ride a push bike from Bowen Hills in the middle of the night sometimes. And so that was his story of how he came to be over here at the Allison test stand. And I was grateful that he was able to tell me all about that before he died. But the fact was that the union were involved right in the middle of the war.
And he wouldn't have been able to use that experience later to get a ticket of any sort. The union wouldn't have allowed it.
No. There was a Tradesmen's Rights Regulation Act, which I was the chairman of it later on, and it was designed to pick up people who had some military service, maybe came out of the services and was employed as a mechanic, just say one category, mechanic, and they could provide army service, and that was a fitter 2E was about the only one that was allowed as a motor mechanic, plus a letterhead from the person who had employed you as a mechanic, not as a tradesman's assistant, nothing else. So long as they could show 6 years of that, they were given a tradesman's rights certificate, which was the equivalent of completing an apprenticeship, a 5-year apprenticeship it was at the time. So if I chaired a meeting, I had a clerk who put all the documentation before the employer organisation, which would be the Metal Trade Industries Association, and on the other half you would have a union that was involved in the automotive industry. And if they agreed, I had no say. If they disagreed, I would normally say trade test. If a trade tested okay, it was given a yep. So that was just another little aspect of the Tradesmen's Rights Regulation Act. It applied to people in Australia who'd never served an apprenticeship, and it also applied to migrants from all around the world, because there was a tripartite mission, went to every country in the world that was where we were seeking migrants from, and we knew exactly what their technical college curriculum was, so it had all match up. We had trade representatives in those countries that did the initial work on, but that's the only way they could get a job with a ticket in Australia, is to get a tradesman's rights certificate. Yep. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Monroe.
Yep. That's about it.
Thank you.